Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IB 2018 mobile webinar series. Today's webinar is the first one in this year's series. Mobile measurement can be perfected. What now? My name is Eva Wu, Director of IB Mobile Center of Excellence, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. I'm really excited about the thought leaders who will be speaking today, and I'll introduce them one by one before their respective segment. So a couple notes on logistics before we get started. Every attendee is currently muted. If you would like to ask a question, please write to us through the moderator chat on the control panel. We'll answer some of the questions as we go along and also queue up some other questions for the Q&A session at the end. So one of the questions we get a lot is whether a recording of the webinar will be available. We'd like to let you know upfront that the answer is yes, and we'll send you a follow-up email with the recording after the webinar, so rest assured. Now going back to the content of the webinar, today's topic is mobile measurement can be perfected, what now? So let's take a look back for a second. In the past several years, we as an industry have made a lot of progress on mobile measurement. For example, IB, the MRC, and the MMA released major overhauls to the mobile web and mobile app measurement guidelines in October 2017 with changes to improve digital advertising measurement. So the revised guidelines shift the mobile web and mobile app from and the ad impression measurement from a minimum of a count on download to a minimum of count on begin to render for ad impression measurement. So this counting methodology is more stringent than previous counting approaches, and it provides a greater potential for an opportunity to see by an end user. And that means higher viewability rate. And speaking of viewability, Open Measurement SDK was released in April. And I think many of you are very familiar with this initiative. For those of you who are not so familiar, in a nutshell, the Open Measurement SDK enables equal data access to all independent third-party verification providers. And it also standardizes collection of measurement signals to minimize discrepancies in metrics. And also, it provides more transparency to the buyers and creates an environment for industry collaboration to solve measurement challenges, not only around availability, but also other potential metrics such as ad fraud and brand safety. So we've done a lot. However, with all these advances, there's still a lot of challenges in mobile advertising measurement today. And mobile web and mobile app still require very different identity mechanism for measuring performances. And the majority of mobile advertising's impact is still happening elsewhere, be it on other devices or offline in the physical world. So making it very difficult to prove out the effectiveness of mobile advertising campaigns, and thus many advertisers have hesitated in investing in this platform. So today we just want to share with you some current best practices for brands to leverage in order to take advantage of the consumer attention on mobile and build a measurement system that they can rely on. So we'll address the challenges that we just talked about one by one. And as always, there is a Q&A session at the end, but as I mentioned, feel free to ask questions during and provide comments anytime during the webinar, and there's no need to wait until the end. We'll answer some questions as we go along. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Deng-Kai Chen, VP of Product at Oath, who will dive deep into the differences between mobile web and app and how to navigate mobile measurement. Hi.
Hey everybody. So my name is Dane Kai Chen. Excited to spend some of my morning with you. I'm a VP of Product Management at Oath, which is the company formerly known as Yahoo and AOL. We've been brought together under the Verizon brand. Some of you may not have heard about Oath before, so let me spend 15 seconds just giving you an overview so you know where I'm coming from in my perspective on mobile measurement. So Oath, we're over 1 billion consumers. We're number 2 in Comscore reach. And you're probably a little bit more familiar with our consumer brands like TechCrunch, Engadget, Tumblr, Huffington Post, as well as all of the legacy Yahoo brands like Sports and Messenger. The product I run is Yahoo Gemini, which is our native ad network. So first and foremost, we're a publisher. So we definitely feel all the measurement challenges as a publisher. But we're also an ad network, and we work with tens of thousands of different advertisers. So we, on a daily basis, understand the challenges that advertisers face when it comes to measuring mobile. Also, Flurry is part of the Oath family as well. So I collaborate a lot with the team there and the analytics suite to really continue diving deep into mobile measurement. So the first slide here shouldn't be any surprise, right? The more and more time is being spent in apps. And a lot of that is actually being spent what I would consider web view. So for example, I'm on Facebook, I'm in Instagram, Twitter, or Reddit, or Yahoo Finance and Sports. I click on a link. But instead of going into the browser, I am viewing that content in that sandboxed web view now, which presents a lot of measurement challenges. And if you read a lot of reports, they will say the second biggest app after the Facebook app is actually the Facebook web view, because not that many people are actually going into mobile Safari or mobile Chrome anymore, because a lot of the time spent is being linked off of these content or social advertising applications. Eva, if you go to the next slide. So as a result of this, measurement remains divided. So obviously, we just talked about the majority of time being spent in an in-app environment where we rely on resettable device IDs like IDFA or Android Advertising ID. On the mobile web world, of course, it's a cookies-based environment. And I'm sure many of the advertisers on this call are omni-channel advertisers, and you need to link your mobile spend and coordinate it and measure it across your desktop spend as well. So this is the ecosystem that exists and the ecosystem that we need to solve for. Next slide. So what measurement actually matters? Because I feel like a lot of what we see today is, well, I need to know everything. And when you think about all the different steps in an advertiser's funnel or ecosystem, on the display or native world, you have the impression, you have the click event, you have a conversion event. On the video side, you have impressions, quartiles, what was the completion rate, was audio on or off, and then of course a conversion then as well. And on top of that, I think we're starting to layer on different slices. Was the ad actually in view? How much of the ad was in the viewport? Was the ad rendered and shown in a brand safe environment? Was my ad actually shown to the audience that I intended it for it to be shown? Obviously, there's been a huge amount of fraud and untrustworthy actors in the space, which has then led to a whole raft of third-party vendors who have risen to help advertisers solve this challenge. So for viewability, fraud, non-human traffic, some of the players are Double Verified, Moat, Integral Ad Science. In the audience verification space, we have actors like Comscore and Nielsen. For brand safety, Grapeshot is one of the main players. And this list continues going on and on and on with a whole bevy of different vendors that advertisers and publishers can work with to create this quote-unquote safe and trusted ecosystem where everyone can transact and get the measurement they need to understand what is their return on investment or their return on advertising spend. Eva, if you go to the next slide. So because of this, there's a lot of added complexity that both advertisers as well as publishers need to deal with in order to enable this third-party measurement as well as third-party verification. The days of just saying, oh, I bought on this exchange, I bought in this network, I'm going to take their reporting 100% as a source of truth are really gone at this point. So on the publisher side, in the in-app environment, in order to measure this, what I would consider fairly deep knowledge, was the ad actually rendered in the viewport? What percentage of the ad was actually shown? And let's start a timer in the background to know down to the millisecond how long it was actually in view for. This requires either a SDK or multiple SDKs. And then, of course, on the transmission to the third party, there's a lot of server-side components and API calls as well. Similarly, on the mobile web side of the world, all this is done through JavaScript tags, which can induce extra friction. And at the end of the day, not everything that you can measure in an in-app environment is actually measurable through mobile web, because there are some core limitations to JavaScript versus an SDK, which ties deeply into the phone's operating system. And of course, there are some server-side components as well. And I think one thing that both advertisers and publishers need to think about in terms of this new data being collected, this new data being generated, sent, interpreted, and stored is, of course, there's privacy challenges, and with GDPR regulatory challenges as well in terms of what we need to disclose to users in terms of what data is being collected and how it's being used. Anytime user level data is being generated, of course, there's security requirements and issues as well. And then on the publisher side, making sure the impact to performance as well as latency of the user experience is minimized. And this is something advertisers should actually care about as well. If the user is having a bad experience because an ad is lagging or causing poor performance, and then the ad finally does load, and then the users are going to associate that poor experience with their brand. So it's not just a publisher challenge, it's both a publisher and advertiser challenge. So with that, even next slide. To further complicate things and add complexity, when we think about basic things like what is an impression, what is a click, what is a quartile, what is viewability, the industry standards are actually still in flux. So I think the IAB and the MRC did a fantastic job 3 or 4 years ago defining what viewability is. However, new definitions are emerging, and the industry standards are a little bit in flux. So holding companies like Publicis as well as Group M have come up with their own definitions of viewability. And certain brands have either adopted those or tweaked those standards to create once again, their own standard of viewability. So I think for advertisers as well as publishers, the question now is, when I enable measurement, what is the actual standard that matters? What is quote unquote the best one? Next slide. So let's dive a little bit deeper into actually how to navigate mobile measurement. So on the advertiser side of the house, before we move to the publisher side, choosing the right metric and then the corresponding vendor is the critical thing. So I would say my advice is don't start with the pitch deck from an ad network like myself or a third-party vendor. It's really about understanding your business and what your KPIs are. And once again, my other piece of advice is really start from the bottom of that funnel and then work your way up. Don't be, sold on really sexy viewability standards or quartile capabilities in video. What is that core? Instead, focus on what is that core conversion event that you're trying to solve, and then think about your attribution model of what you believe influences that conversion. Once you have that defined, then you can think through, okay, how much is a click worth to me? How much is an impression worth to me in this attribution model? And therefore, I should care a little bit or I should care a lot about viewability and some of the things that we just talked about. Once you have that defined, then it's all about the vendor selection process. So some things to keep in mind as you meet with different vendors and companies in the space. One is, what do the platforms do they support? You as an advertiser likely buy across a variety of different exchanges, networks, and DSPs. Are they supported widely across the board? Second, what is their methodology for measuring across app as well as desktop and mobile web? Do you believe in their deterministic models? Do you believe in their probabilistic models and how they tie all these different pieces of data and pools of supply together to provide you with unified reporting? Third is, what is the data that they provide? We've talked about some high-level metrics, but going deeper beyond that, and into this fourth bullet point, beyond viewability, non-human traffic, fraud, click bots, audience verification, brand safety. What are all the different things that they measure that you believe tangibly affects your funnel and your attribution model? And then, of course, the last thing is I've seen a lot of different fee models and fee structures out there. So figuring out what is the right one that works, once again, with what you're actually trying to measure in terms of your KPIs and your conversion funnel. Next slide. So onto the publisher side, also a very confusing time. So my recommendations is really talk with other platforms, talk with other publishers in the space, and of course, talk with the third-party providers. I think things are moving very quickly as we kind of move into this second wave of mobile measurement, and the standards are changing quickly. So first off, engage with industry groups like the IAB. Eva talked a little bit about the Open Measurement SDK, and this is something I'm keeping a very close eye on and have a lot of hopes for. On the publisher side, of course, the current world is, I need to integrate with GrapeShot, with Moat, with IS, with Double Verify, with Comscore Nielsen, and I'm quickly up to like 6 or 7 different SDKs, which just simply is not a scalable solution. So please take a look at the Open Measurement SDK to see if it's the right solution for you. Second, all the different platforms you work with, whether they're SSPs, whether you engage with exchanges or DSPs directly, they're all a little bit different in terms of their capabilities and the advertisers and demand sources they work with. So have an open conversation with them about, hey, the advertisers and the demand sources that you're repping, who are they? Do they really require third-party verification? If so, what are the vendors that you support and partner with? And more importantly, what is the integration path that you've gone down? I think the thing to highlight here is there's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and different partners may have different integration mechanisms with different vendors, and it's all about learning about what is the technical requirements, what is the latency and performance and user experience effects of the different integration paths that you choose, and how does that affect my reliability, my security and privacy, my global user consent, and other GDPR-related notifications that I need to flash to my user. And then, of course, last but not least, as a publisher, do I need to bear the cost of some of this measurement, or is that something that gets passed on to the platform or to the advertisers themselves? So, like I said, mobile measurement has gotten much easier, but I believe the second wave of mobile measurement is now rising. So I think on the advertiser and publisher side, please talk with other advertisers and publishers. Please engage with industry groups like the IAB, and let us know what are your questions, what are your difficult pain points, and obviously we'll continue working with the IAB to try to bring more information, more transparency to light as we walk through some of these challenges. So back to you, Eva. I don't know if there's any questions so far.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Kai. I think I just wanted to echo one of the things that you mentioned about latency, which appears not very obvious to a lot of the marketers as something that they should care about. But it's certainly a huge component of user experience, and it's definitely the priority of all marketers today. And I think that's why one of the things that I mentioned in the opening was the newly revised mobile web and app measurement guidelines. The impression measurement minimum, we decided to change it to count on begin to render. There were suggestions about changing it to count on fully rendered, but research and study, we've done a lot of like data collecting, and has shown that that like count on completely render would potentially cause a lot of latency in terms of because there's just more measurement that goes into it. So, and there was also research showing that like two different, count on begin to render versus count on render actually didn't show much of a difference. So I think that's one of the reasons why, if people have questions about why the industry had chosen that particular metric, that is the reason behind it. So let us know if you have any other questions coming through. But let me just move forward to the next section of the presentation for now. And we have Nishant Khatri, VP of Product of PubMedic. And since Kai have kind of taken us over the intramobile side of things, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the cross-device measurement, as it's very important because a lot of the conversions are actually happening on these other devices. So Nishant?
Yeah, hi, my name is Nishant Khatri. I'm VP of Product Management, PubMedic. Very excited to be here today. So before I start my presentation, I just wanted to introduce PubMedic and myself a little bit more. PubMedic is a leading supply-side platform enabling billions of advertising transactions daily between publishers and advertisers across display, mobile, and video formats. At PubMedic, I manage our ad marketplace products, which is basically three key areas. All the ways in which publishers integrate with our platform, buyers integrate with our platform, and then running a safe marketplace by removing bad experiences such as fraud, malicious creatives, and just generally ensuring that the quality of impressions is high enough. So in terms of agenda, today I'm providing an introductory overview of cross-device measurement and targeting. We will begin by looking at why marketers should pay attention to this area and look at some implementation basics from a user's point of view. And then finally, no responsible conversation on advanced targeting and measurement techniques is complete without a view of user privacy. So I will conclude my portion with a few pointers there. This is certainly an advanced area. So listeners who wish to learn about the area at a greater level of proficiency, I would leave you with some resources that you could utilize at any point after the webinar. There are a number of companies, I believe, who are building compelling products and solutions in this area. So there are a lot of high quality resources available, more when we get there. Next slide, please. So an online research reported some compelling data about consumers' behaviors related to their use of multiple devices. My guess is by looking at the 80% number on the left, not many people on this call are surprised. I think what is revealing though is that a staggering 67% of consumers use multiple devices to shop online. On top of that, 40% online transactions start on one device, but complete on another, with 25% of all such transactions starting on mobile, but finishing on desktop. So in practice, this could mean seeing an ad on one device, looking for additional information on another, and then finally completing the purchase on a third. So this is really important for all marketers, but particularly for advertisers. In an era of increased accountability, advertisers should be paying special attention to such transactions and must ensure that they have proper measurement in place to track their ROI. So let's discuss these benefits one by one. I've called out three here on this slide. which as marketers, I think you probably care a lot about. So firstly, marketers can build more complete and improved customer journey maps, consumer interaction data on a mobile phone, tablet, desktop. All of these channels do not need to be siloed and can be connected together. As a result, marketers are able to create cohorts of users and plot interactions of consumers across multiple devices. So for instance, the way to kind of conceptualize this, visualize this even more, is that you might be able to see differences just as an example in behaviors of users who see an ad on a mobile device versus a tablet. And then in terms of actionable next steps, by observing these behaviors, you can tune the layout of your desktop website depending on the measured differences in the customer's path to purchase. The point is that marketers are able to create holistic personas that are these cohorts of users I just mentioned, and then allow them to strategize how to better interact with customers. And that applies not just to secondly, the data on the previous slide, of course, tells us that consumers are taking multiple steps on their path to purchase, whether it is a product or a service that your company offers. And needless to say, that includes ads that consumers see as well. So my point is that on an individual by individual consumer user level, marketers can connect all the data points to their CRM data and message at an individual customer level or consumer level. Eventually, this adds to the overall your overall ability to measure more effectively, which is slightly different from a customer journey maps, quite different from a customer journey maps, which is about measuring behaviors of cohorts of users who are displaying similar commonalities in the path that they're using to interact with their brand. Thirdly, proving ROI of marketing plans is possible much more reliably now. An advertiser would be able to say, for instance, let's say that they put $10,000 towards a digital campaign, and as a result, they saw 2,000 conversions, of which 1,000 happened on mobile and another 1,000 happened on desktop. So advertisers can ensure that consumers are being targeted with the right message on every device. And then eventually, by enabling this cross-device measurement, test multiple messages, see which one is working best. And once they have proof of ROI with the right message, marketers can invest resources at the right place, strategically helping decisions on future investment. So these are really tremendous opportunities for marketers to leverage cross-device, even though when you are at a high level, this sounds very complex. It opens up this very powerful reason for adopting cross-device measurement. I wouldn't say that it's an exaggeration in today's day and age to say that cross-device measurement is an essential tactic for marketers in 2018. So let's talk about some implementation basics now. And before I kind of, next slide, please. So before I jump into what is deterministic versus probabilistic, I think let's establish, some measurement fundamentals on the web. And I think I referred to it in his slides, but I want to reiterate that on web, consumers are being identified using cookies. In-app environments have their own IDs. Like in the Apple devices, you have IDFA, or what is also called as IFA, identifier for advertisers. Android has its version 2. And then finally on mobile web, You have cookies which have their own limitations. Apple doesn't allow third-party cookies by default. My point is that that is really the key driver of complexity here. All these identifiers are in their own namespaces, and as such, there is no direct connection between these identifiers. So this results, in the past, it resulted in a fragmented view of the user's actions. But my point is that by adopting cross-device strategies, now there's a way to create that missing link and connect users' interactions across these devices, despite the fact that these devices continue to have their own identifiers. So the way to link these together falls in two different buckets. One is commonly called as deterministic techniques, and the other one is probabilistic techniques. So the key difference, though, regardless of there's a ton of detail here in each one of these strategies, but the key difference is that the nature of signals used to connect users across multiple devices is a deterministic ID, like let's say a email ID or a hashed email ID in the case of deterministic strategy. And in case of probabilistic strategy, it involves collecting a number of signals on any given device, and then being able to collect billions of data points in order to see which device or which devices any individual user owns. So essentially, a probabilistic approach, which probably requires a little bit more research, is one where you could partner with a company that would help you with translating a user ID that might be in your CRM data into multiple device IDs that the user owns. More on this in the next couple of slides. So let's talk about deterministic first. This is a simple workflow, despite all the detail here, which lays out how straightforward utilizing cross-device measurements can be in today's world. So in this workflow, let's assume that advertiser is using an advertising platform which has access to a deterministic ID, such as a hashed email ID. So, and by the way, hashing is a technique that is commonly used in the industry as it is regarded privacy safe. So in this context, an impression is delivered on a mobile device. The impression is registered against that deterministic ID, whatever that might be. Let's say it's a hashed email ID. The user clicks on the ad, interacts with the ad, but does not make a purchase. And let's say later that evening, the user looks for additional information on their desktop and continues to make a purchase. Now let's also assume that the user is logged in on this new device. So the purchase is tagged against that, again, a hashed email ID. And because the impression was delivered on another device, tagged against the hashed email ID, there's a connection now. So that's how a cross-device attribution is achieved, as long as, obviously, user is logged in on both the formats or both those channels. In terms of how the transaction actually happens, there are a few different ways in how you could agree to share the data as a marketer with the advertiser platform of your choice, or make things work the other way around, where the other platform shares data with you as the marketer. And it completely depends on what kind of agreement you have with your partners here, which can help you then track the effectiveness using this deterministic technique. Next slide, please. So probabilistic cross-device measurements rely on creation of pre-built lists of multiple devices. That's the most commonly used approach. As I mentioned earlier, these linkages between multiple devices are called device graphs commonly. and there are several companies in our ecosystem who have created large-scale device graphs. They process several signals from each device, and and process billions of signals across the web. So generally speaking, this does not include a deterministic ID like email ID, but instead it relies on signals like IP address, user agent, and could potentially include a multitude of other signals. In cross-device targeting techniques, scale, accuracy, and precision, all these concepts matter. It is not interesting for a marketer, for instance, if let's say they start to adopt cross-device and find out that there's only a handful of users, or only a small number of their desired users to be targeted, and hence they don't reach the scale that they would be looking for in order for this to make sense for them. In terms of workflow, though, probabilistic is not very different from deterministic. A user sees an impression, the event is registered, and the conversion signal is collected from one of the many devices in that user's device graph. In summary, my point is that many publishers and ecosystem companies do not have access to users' email ID. So probabilistic techniques can be credited in those scenarios with providing scale to cross-device outside of some large company or large publisher environments. So once again, just to be clear, deterministic cross-device is great. It works very well. However, probabilistic has a key advantage that it increases the scale and advertiser choice as a result. Next slide, please. So I did want to talk a little bit about user privacy in context of cross-device. As I mentioned earlier, it involves a deterministic or probabilistic. One way or the other, there's a collection of multitude of data points, and other than the larger companies, multiple platforms have to work together to enable these type of targeting and measurement use cases. So as a result, all transacting parties need to ensure that user choices are respected. As with any responsible user privacy approach, all the necessary disclosures, opt-out mechanisms should be in place. And finally, marketers interested in adopting these strategies should also look out for local regulations, which now includes GDPR. Good timing of this webinar with GDPR rolling out tomorrow. And also consult internal experts who are authorities within your companies in these topics related to user privacy and local regulations. So in conclusion, I just want to say that marketers have an incredible opportunity with cross-device. The area does have a number of details to look into. So I would encourage attendees who are interested in digging deeper to look at some additional resources. In my own readings over the past few days, I came across a very nice white paper from Drawbridge, which gets into a good level of high-level overview, but also I thought demystifies really the probabilistic approach very well. The white paper is called Cross-Device Graph for Marketers, and I would be working with Eva to make sure that the proper links for those resources I refer to are included in the follow-up presentation that you get after the webinar. There are other companies in the space who are doing great work also, such as LiveRamp and a number of others. So again, if you're interested in learning more about this strategy in more detail, please feel free to access one of these resources.
Great.
So this concludes my section of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Nishant. Yes, we'll definitely make sure that those links are being shared in the follow-up emails as well as the recording. And we actually have a question for you, and this is from Michael. So he's asking that what other identifiers could be used for deterministic data? And I know you mentioned some, and I think maybe just give a recap of what all those were.
Yeah, so a great question there. I think email ID and hashed email ID, I guess both are same, right? Is probably one of the best signals, but when you are, let's say, within the environments of a larger platform, and I think I can name a name here, let's say Facebook, um, they could have their own proprietary techniques to connect users across multiple platforms. Uh, However, I think the ones which might be more broadly available outside of a single platform, I think the biggest one is a hashed email ID.
Okay, great. And I think really the question is more so like what other identifiers could be used?
Yeah, so Eva, I think that's my point, that I think when it comes to, let's say, an individual platform, the platform could create a version of identification which is accessible only to themselves. So it's hard to kind of give a name for that ID
Right, right.
because it is proprietary.
Okay, got it. And yeah, in the interest of time, I think we should move on, and maybe we'll address some of the other questions at the end, because I'm personally very excited about this next section, and because a lot of the conversions are still happening offline in the real world. Believe it or not, a lot of people are still going into the retail stores and not only try on stuff, but actually make the purchases there. So it is very important to address that aspect of the consumer journey. And I'd be very excited to turn it over to Kyle Wentling, Attribution Product Manager at Foursquare, to give us an overview and some case studies. And just dive into the online offline attribution and how mobile plays a role in bridging the gaps between these two worlds. Kyle?
All right. All right. Hi, everybody. I was actually interested to hear how Nishant was going to demystify the drawbridge cross-device graph, because that's something I was staring at yesterday. But I hope to catch up with him later. Yeah, my name is Kyle Winling. I work for Foursquare, which most people know as the Foursquare check-in app or the Swarm check-in app. But we've evolved into an enterprise location intelligence company, and we have all kinds of location products that power location intel, media measurement, for thousands of different companies. I'm specifically the product manager for the Foursquare attribution product, which is our visit measurement product. So let's talk a little bit about mobile to offline attribution. I know this is the IAB, and we have a pretty experienced and sophisticated ad tech and martech audience, so I'm not going to go too much into that side of it. I want to try to talk more about the offline world, the location side of it, and try to show you guys some fun stuff and give you some best practices. So the main ingredients in offline attribution are: you need to have visits, you need to know if somebody visited, you need to know about impressions, I think, which we already talked about in the previous two webinars, which was some really great information. And we also have to have a methodology to tie visits to impressions. And our kind of key KPI that comes out of this is lift measurement. In offline world, people think that e-commerce maybe is a little bit larger than it is. The old saw is that still 90% of purchases still occur offline, and this is repeated every year, and I think it's still true today. So just to look again at the key pieces of what we mean when we say offline attribution. So this is impressions, in this case executed on a mobile device, and then understanding that device's visits to a retail location, and then measuring the effect of that advertising to determine if the advertising had a causative effect, and if it did, then we measure lift. So I just wanted to talk a little bit and give you guys some news you can use right off the bat about the state of the offline measurement world in 2018. If you are a marketer already, you probably understand that it already sees wide adoption. So measuring mobile to offline is growing year over year tremendously, and it's not really new to anybody at this point if you're in a retail space. So we see everybody from QSR and apparel and grocery using offline measurement to measure all their mobile impressions, as well as maybe more surprising groups like CPG, so they can really understand more about their audience insights. They can get a lot of market share insights this way. And execution wise, for people and ad tech companies, publishers that provide ability to measure this way, you can see some examples on the right. So there's really a huge opportunity to measure most digital and most mobile advertising via online measurement and really generate that lift KPI, which can be very powerful to understand how your mobile advertising is really driving in-store visits and in-store sales. So I want to talk about a little bit about why mobile is great. It is perfect for attribution. So when you are executing in a mobile environment, especially if you're executing in-app, it means that you're getting like a very pure and simple way to measure those in-store visits, so you don't have as many issues with cross-device matching. It also, if you're using mobile, in-flight optimizations become a lot more powerful. So if your offline attribution provider is really providing you optimizations in flight about who is performing with respect to lift, which of your targeting segments are performing, which of your partners are performing. If you're using mobile, that has like the fastest turnaround on the increase in lift, sort of the optimizations that you can make are the most powerful when you use mobile. Also, if you're using mobile, especially in-app, you're going to get very rich audience insights in your reporting. So your offline attribution reports, if they are showing, if you're measuring on device and you're very sure about the people that you're showing impressions to and who are visiting, you're going to get great insights there. And then just overall, I think the key takeaway here is if you were wondering, if mobile advertising, if this really works with respect to driving visits, I think the answer is yes. So at Foursquare, we looked at all campaigns in 2017 that we had measured with respect to lift over billions and billions of impressions, and we found that mobile overall outperformed desktop with respect to lift by about 2x. So absolutely, mobile is perfect for doing offline attribution. So, we've talked about, we get this lift KPI, and that's the key KPI that most marketers and brands are interested in. And that KPI is extremely valuable alone, but it's just like a grade on a piece of homework. It's not, the full potential of what you can do with offline attribution. So if you talk to, savvy marketers and agencies on Madison Avenue or in LA, and you look at their media execution plan and their execution team, they all kind of have the same strategy with respect to mobile advertising and using offline attribution to measure it. And the strategy really is to think in terms of this virtuous cycle. So what you want to do is you want to execute this cycle and get a positive feedback loop. So you're really not just measuring what you're doing, but you're using it to be more effective with how you're spending your money, and also who you're driving and how much you're driving incrementality. So the idea is that you execute your mobile campaigns, you measure it with offline. This is generating campaign optimizations, in flight as the campaign is going, or post-campaign. And you use that information to not only measure, but you can create better segments and you can create more accurate targeting tactics based on that. So I can give you some examples later, but I wanted to talk about kind of the key difference between what Kai and Nishant were talking about when we were talking about measuring viewability and measuring cross-device all in the digital world, and sort of the fundamental difference between doing that and then taking this and measuring conversions in the real world. So the value in all these marketing metrics, they come from accurate results, and anybody who's familiar with marketing experiments knows that you have to have a solid foundation all the way down. And the data that you get from your measurement is only good as the data foundation of what you're building that measurement on top of. So, when we look at trying to measure in-store visitation, it's a really interesting and exciting challenge, and it's a little bit different than I thought when coming into this. So detecting visits to a place that you're measuring in a noisy real-world environment is much different than firing a pixel when you're at the bottom of an e-commerce funnel. It's a different medium, and I want to talk a little bit about how it's different, and then ways to really measure a visit in the real world. So here we can see this is real data from an actual case study that we ran measuring a Shake Shack on 86th Street in New York, and this is pretty recent data. And what these points that we're looking at in these three different slides, so each point represents a human confirmed check-in that they were in fact in that Shake Shack. So they were in that little, it's a green rectangle that we've drawn. It's the same in each slide. So what we're seeing is that the device was actually in the real world was inside that rectangle, but the signal that it was transmitting from its GPS are those dots. So that's the location that the device thinks it is, but it's in all cases it's inside that Shake Shack. So when we did this study, we looked at the different ways that you can measure visitation and the different strategies you can use to try to figure out if a device is visiting a location. The first strategy that's used by a lot of vendors, this is pretty widely used in the industry, is to try a geofencing strategy where you just draw that box around the Shake Shack, or maybe you draw a little bit bigger box to try to get more visits. And what this first panel is showing is that those pink pins are pins where we captured the correct visit. So they were visiting the Shake Shack, and we got that right. But all the darker pins, those are missed. So those darker pins were actually visiting the Shake Shack, but that GPS signal, didn't allow us to put them in that building. So there's other methods you can try as well. So geofencing, you can see it has some limitations if you're just using that GPS signal. You could try using a radius strategy where you just draw a circle around the location you're at. And so in this strategy, you're saying, everybody whose location ping that I see within the circle, they're visiting the Shake Shack. So in this case, you can see that, we have more pink pins. So it's doing better, capturing a bigger percentage of the visits. I think it's actually capturing around 40% of them. But you can see it's still missing about 60% of them. And you can, you might look at this and say, well, why don't vendors they can just make the radius bigger and get all of those? So I looked up the data for this specific case, and within this circle already, if you were just thinking about who had location pings within that circle, it would have 40% false positives of people who weren't in the Shake Shack. So radius strategy has limitations as well. So at Foursquare, we've thought a lot about this, and we have devised a methodology that uses our first-party check-in. So this is really, an amazing data set that we have that's ground truth data on billions and billions of explicit check-ins, which basically makes a giant labeled set that's perfect for supervised machine learning. So this is what we use. So when we get a check-in, we don't just use GPS. We also get cellular signals, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, accelerometer. We get a whole bunch of location signals, which with each of those explicit check-ins, and those make an amazing training set to learn off of. So in this case, our snap to place technology, if we asked it, for each of these signals, were you in Shake Shack, it would got them right. You can see for all the little pink pins, a vast majority of the time. So rolling this all up, if we look at the case study results, so this case study that we ran, it was run in Q1 of 2018, and we looked at about 1,000 retail stores in 3 markets. I think it was New York, LA, and Chicago. It included some covered mall locations. These were the roll-up results. If we looked at per location ping that we got, and then comparing it to our ground truth labeled check-ins, how correct were they? And you can see geofence and radius, they were not doing that well. I think they're actually under 30% accurate. And at that accuracy, I think it's very difficult to come up if you're trying to do attribution with an incremental visit lift measurement. And it's in most cases, I think, impossible to do that. So these two first strategies, they're very widely used, but I feel like they have a lot of weaknesses. Another interesting point about this study, which is not on this slide, but we also looked at what happens if you just, you want to say that somebody visited. What if you just look at the nearest location that you know about that's close to that lat long ping that you got from the phone? And it turns out that's actually wrong 70% of the time as well. And this is just because the way cell phones behave in the real world is very different than how you'd expect, and it's very different when you're inside versus outside. So really, you need to have all those additional signals. You need to have Wi-Fi. You need to have all the different cellular tower signals that you can get. You need to have explicit confirmation to build like an accurate visit model that really understands when people are visiting in the real world. So now that we talked about, we got our visit piece, we have our impression piece. The next part of doing offline attribution is putting those two pieces together and really measuring incremental lift. So the top line KPI that most brands and marketers are interested in is really understanding, did the advertising drive visits? Did it work, basically? And the way that we can think about that, there's several different ways to do it. So on the left, is what happens if you maybe don't have as much first-party data, or if all you know about is who was impressed and then who visited. So the way, anybody who's done a marketing experiment and tried to set up a test control understands that doing this would be limited if you don't understand anything about the control group. You're going to have a really hard time matching that exposed and control in a way that's really going to talk about incrementality and isn't necessarily going to be biased or skewed by something about those two groups that you're unaware of. So doing it this way, we've also at Foursquare done lots of experiments trying to just match visit rates from exposed groups and control groups, and it really isn't reliable, just because there are so many different types of people out there, and they have such different behavior with respect to visits to different places. For instance, if you're measuring a QSR, you can have, let's say it's a Panera Bread, and you have a loyalist who goes every day. They're going to have very different behavior than somebody that goes once every 3 months. And if you impress the loyalist, is that really showing lift? So the second thing that you can try, if you do have some more information, and we found out the most important information to have in user matching is to have a loyalty history of the people that you're trying to match, because that's very powerful in knowing whether you're driving incrementality or if somebody was going to go anyway. They may have seen let's say, use Panera again, let's say they've seen a coupon for Panera and they visited, but they visit all the time anyway. Was that incremental? So one-to-one matching along dimensions like age, gender, loyalty, location. So that can produce better results, and I think that's more around true incrementality. It's very simple to think about. It's easy to explain to people, but it has some limitations. If you've done marketing experiments, you'll know the more dimensions you add, the more difficult it's going to be to match an exposed person to a control person. So it becomes very hard to build that control group. And what happens is that you end up not being able to use all of this rich visit data that's been collected. So what we do at Foursquare, and what I think is kind of a standard in a lot of advanced statistical methods for determining lift, is to use a machine learning model. And the way we use it is to include a huge number of attributes or features based on the rich visit history that we know about our Foursquare panel. So this really helps us to detect true incrementality. It also helps us use all of our data so we can start to get more granular. So offline attribution, the way the industry is moving, traditionally people measure national campaigns, but there is a need to measure at the DMA level, at the region level, at the store level. So if you want to start measuring at the store level and understanding the differences, you have to be able to use all of your data and get as granular as possible. And what this machine learning model also does is it will allow you to get very precise optimizations for all of the features that you put in there. So now that we've talked about like those three pieces and putting them together, I'd like to sort of go over, if you are out there in the world, if you are a media planner in an agency, or if you're at a brand and you have all these kind of different options out there for who's an offline measurement provider, it can be difficult. And unfortunately, I think it's still kind of the Wild West, and it's up to the publishers and the agencies and the brands to evaluate providers. Hopefully this will shake out and we'll have some flight to quality. But right now, I feel like this is the reality, is that people are being asked to evaluate. How do I know which offline measurement provider I should use and whose results should I trust? At the IAB, I would love to work more with the IAB to develop more standards around offline measurements, and maybe even talk about how we can work with the Open Measurement SDK. But today, really, it's all about you have to understand the provider. So you need to understand where they're getting their location data. How are they measuring location? Can they demonstrate that they understand where places are? And you need to understand how they're measuring lift. And if you really believe that methodology can measure incremental lift, do they have enough signal to measure it, and are they measuring it accurately? And then one of the benefits that we talked about, the best thing I think about offline measurement, is that it can give you really powerful data about how to optimize your campaign. So you might want to optimize. A very common thing to do with offline measurement is to compare partner performance, or you might discover a demographic that you didn't know you should be targeting that's more powerful. So there are all kinds of cases where offline measurement can provide you kind of audience data that no other types of measurement can really provide. So here's some, if you're trying to execute mobile campaigns, just based on our experience at Foursquare, here are some kind of best practices or news you can use of how you should go about executing those campaigns. The first thing I like to talk about is activation. So you should prefer to execute high quality inventory. So that's based on the two previous presentations. You can see how you can do viewability and how you can identify high quality inventory sources. This just means that your signal is going to be a lot cleaner when you go to measure it, and you want to prefer channels that allow third-party measurement. So we talked about also there are some channels that only allow grading their own homework, and there's some that allow third-party measurement. I feel like anyway that I would trust a third party to measure the campaign. This also, I think, feels a little bit to me in offline measurement like viewability was maybe 5 years ago, where the industry was at the time. Really those viewability providers were doing a great service, but they weren't able to measure all of those different media channels out there. And we realized that mobile, usually, if you're executing a modern media plan, it consists of many channels. It's an omni-channel mix, and you want to include mobile as part of that to get the best offline measurement. So when you're doing offline measurement or a campaign measurement, really the best thing to do is to include as much media as you can, so you can compare it side by side, and also so that you can really understand true incrementality. You can measure the impact of previous impressions on current impressions, and you want to make sure that your provider can also tell you and evaluate correctly if there's multi-channel media mix going on, if somebody was impressed by ads that were on a mobile device or on desktop or on audio in these many channels. Can they really measure the impact of each of those different channels and impressions? And so people always ask us, hey, what is the optimal frequency? How many times should I be impressing somebody to drive a visit? And the answer is 4. It may be a little bit more complicated than that, but that's what we see. It's people always ask us this, and then they execute campaigns in a way that they don't tend to activate more than 4 times per device. And what we have measured is that the more times you activate, the higher the lift. So I think the more is better, but 4 is about the average where we see lift peak. And then so beyond lift, like if you're looking to do offline measurement, you should really look to all those other great audience insights that you can get from doing this. And you should really use those in real time or in near time to try to optimize how your campaign is running and boost your ROI, because you can learn a lot about who your audience is and what they're responding to and what creatives are working in real time. Okay, well, thanks everybody for your time, and please let me know if you have any questions.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Kyle. I find it very helpful and really appreciate that you're sharing of all the insights that you gathered at Foursquare. So we're unfortunately running out of time. We do have a couple questions, and I have to follow up with you just to be respectful of everyone's time online. So I just wanted to thank you all for attending, and thanks all the speakers for sharing their valuable insights today. We'll follow up with the link and also for those of you who have questions that we didn't get to answer. And we'll see you soon at our future webinars. Thanks, everyone.